All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. Now, remember, this is a kind of transitionary period, right? Where Jonathan Hickman stops calling it Fantastic Four, and he starts calling it Future Foundation. We'll call it FF for short, which is technically what it's called. So just be aware, next week, it'll be FF Volume 1. So just know that, so you don't think we stopped doing Fantastic Four. But what this video does here is this focuses on the full power of Franklin Richards and exactly what he's capable of. Now, something that we kind of have to keep in mind, and you'll notice this as we get further into Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, where he bounces back and forth between the Fantastic Four comic when he brings it back and the Future Foundation comic that he keeps going, that the Future Foundation comic is designed to be drawn from the perspective of Franklin Richards, whereas Fantastic Four is just kind of drawn from the perspective of the Fantastic Four, right? So a child's viewpoint versus an adult's viewpoint. And that's why here we basically jump back to the story that we did at the very beginning, when you basically had adult Franklin Richards who showed up to his younger self and then basically woke his powers up. And so what this does is it shows the child Franklin Richards basically taking that pocket universe that he created in that comic and then putting it in a closet. And the thing about this is that he kind of just hides it away. He doesn't quite know exactly what to do with it. Now, that right there shows that he literally turned his closet into a place of infinite space because it's big enough to house a whole universe that he made. Now, we do get this kind of 3-issue fast track, right? Where it's like, there's the whole events with the death of Johnny Storm. Johnny Storm basically stayed behind. He ended up dying. That the Fantastic Four are really, really sad, that kind of thing. And so he ultimately ends up meeting with his friend Leech. Now, Leech is a character who is crazy underrated in Marvel Comics. He's not really powerful insofar as he can like alter reality and different things like that. It's really more of the fact that Leech can shut down the powers of anyone he comes across, and there's seemingly no limit to the powers that he can shut down. The most powerful being that we've seen him affect was a guy named basically Mr. M, Absalom Mercator. This was a guy whose powers were arguably on the same level as Franklin, the ability to alter reality, and he was an Omega level mutant. Of course, it was the actions of Leech that led to the death of Absalom in the first place, but that seems to be the limit of his powers so far. But the thing about this is that Franklin and Leech kind of go on an adventure where they enter into the closet. So what I want you guys to keep in mind is that from this point going forward throughout the rest of this video, as short as it's going to be, all of this takes place in the universe that Franklin Richards created. And in fact, he's actually making things in real time. It's crazy how powerful he is. It's easy to overlook, right? But like once him and Leech jump in there, they end up showing up on Earth. And then what they end up doing is actually crafting identities for themselves, right? Costumes. They make themselves into superheroes, right? Hyperstorm and Kid Incredible. Now, Hyperstorm, what's really ironic about this is that Hyperstorm is actually the name that the son of Franklin Richards in an alternate reality will end up using. And in fact, he becomes a villain and he's ridiculously powerful. Like, it's nuts. He's not as powerful as Franklin, I don't think, to be honest with you guys, but he's ridiculously OP. So much so that virtually any superhero or supervillain in the modern day would not be able to hold their own against Hyperstorm, right? He was crazy how powerful he was. But what these two do is they literally go on an adventure, right? So like these aliens with flying saucers, they try to invade Earth, and like Leech and Franklin are like conjuring these powers and like destroying these guys. Franklin Richards is making all this up as he goes along. He literally just creates this alien race out of nowhere, right? He just fabricates it out of nowhere and like destroys them. They end up going underground, and instead of the Mole Man being the one that leads the Moloids, it ends up being Dr. Doom. They end up facing off against these guys, right? They manage to defeat the Mole Men, and then of course they capture Dr. Doom. Again, this is all Franklin Richards just making this up on the spot, right? Just using his insanely high reality warping powers to just create these things. That's the thing to keep in mind. They weren't there before. He just made them and just brought them into existence. And so the crazy thing about this is that while all this is going on, you literally have Dr. Doom who's just like responding to Franklin, Franklin's responding to Dr. Doom, so on and so forth. And then future Franklin appears, right? And he literally asks the question, what's going on? Playtime's becoming a bit predictable, isn't it? Just twisted versions of everything we've seen before. We can do better than that, right? He's like, I want to show you something. And so Franklin's like, okay. So you basically have Franklin Richards that goes with his adult self self, and his adult self is like, first off, to be fair, this is on the surface incredibly impressive, right? Fully realized Earth, like a completely and fully realized Earth, implied rules for behavior, meaning you've conjured beings into existence, and based on your own knowledge, they're responding and acting exactly the way they would in the real world. And a suggestion of even physics, right? Like, what you've done here, Franklin Richards, is you've created not just a whole universe, you've created an entire Earth that literally operates according to, or at least as close as you can get, to real world physics. Now, for those of you guys who follow Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, going into like Secret Wars in 2015, and at the end of that story, you basically had Franklin Richards, who was operating as a universal shaper, which is to say, he was drawing on the power of the Molecule Man Owen Reese to create whole universes, and then populating those universes based on everything that Reed Richards remembered. This is where this starts, right? This is where that concept comes from. Franklin Richards creating a whole universe for the very first time. And even his adult self says, look at that, right? Everything. You made everything, Franklin Richards. You made everything in existence. And so you literally have Franklin, who's just like, yeah, I know, like, what's the big deal about this? And his adult version asked the question, well, if Franklin made everything, Leech, what does that make him? And the response of Leech is, it makes him God, right? It makes him this godly character. And so the response of Kid Franklin is like, that's crazy, right? Like, I'm just a little boy with a great big huge imagination. And his adult self says, actually, Franklin, you're too close to one and not enough of the other. Literally, you're a god with not enough imagination, right? You're a god that doesn't quite have all the imagination he needs in order to create things. But what we're going to do, Franklin, is from this day going forward, every day we're going to meet here and we're going to practice, right? We're going to practice creating universes. We're going to practice creating Earths. We're going to practice creating everything in existence so that when it's all said and done, yes, Franklin Richards, you will be as close to God as any one particular being can be. So again, this is a relatively short video. It's not overly lengthy, but for those of you guys who are curious about how Franklin Richards became so powerful and why he's able to use his powers in such an advanced way, seemingly out of nowhere in the middle of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, it's because of this. It kind of happens off panel to a degree. If I remember correctly, and I'll have to go through and read just to double check, I think there are some stories that take place after the main story arc is done that kind of come back and touch on this stuff a little bit, but literally it's adult Franklin Richards teaching his younger self how to use the full totality of his abilities, all of which will become ridiculously important once we get to the return of Galactus. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.